When a woman wears a burqa in the United Kingdom, not only is she signalling her repression, what she's doing is rejecting British culture. For reasons that are not clear to me, really not clear to me, Farage loathes Tommy Robinson. We are facing existential threat in this country. Reform is not the answer. It pretends to be the answer. It ain't the answer. It doesn't have the fearlessness. We need lions. Reform has become a cult of Farage. He's cunning as hell, but we don't want a fox. We want a lion. There are 1.5 million foreigners in this country taking benefits. In order to have borders that work, they need to be physically enforced. There are British judges sitting in support groups for illegal migrants. Judges, I'm not talking about barristers. These are judges. There is no point getting into a fight unless you're prepared to go all the way. Send these bastards back to Pakistan. We'll give them a bit of Pakistani justice. The fact that Rachel Reeves could sit in Parliament crying for her own whatever her personal issue was, for our pensioners, no tears for them.
Did you feel any empathy at all for her?
None. I was repulsed by the scene.
Did you think, fuck her?
No, I didn't think fuck her.
I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors, Gold-Seal. I use their products every single day, and now I finally get to work with them. I use their products for anti-inflammatory, reduced anxiety, better sleep, and mental clarity. I'm going to put a link to their website in the description, along with a 10% discount code for you to take advantage of. Go and have a look at their website, see if there's anything in there for you. I hope you enjoy this week's episode, and good health. Ben, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Liam. Great pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, and you. Well, congratulations on the launch of your new political party. And you've agreed to come on for a nothing off the table interview. So
no holds barred. Go for it.
Yeah, already I tip my hat. There's no point being cautious, especially if you're putting yourself in a position that you are. Some of my viewers will know exactly who you are. I think a lot of my audience are probably reform voters, and there'll be some that don't know. So I know you've done a bit of boxing in university. I know you was part of the Brexit Party, but just give me a brief background of who you are, your life, before we segue into the reform story and fallout. Give me a bit of your background.
Yeah, from birth onwards?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, okay, so...
What time and what day were you born?
So, very briefly, I was born in Karachi in 1965, which makes me 60 years old this year. My father is Pakistani, my mother is English. Mum and Dad met in the United Kingdom when he was doing a PhD here. She got on a boat, went back to Pakistan with him. She was, I think, just about the only white, blonde, blue-eyed architect that Pakistan had probably experienced in those days. She used to go to building sites and build buildings. Can you imagine in the 1960s, Karachi? And then she did that all the way through until my parents got divorced in 96. But anyway, I was born in Karachi in 1965. I had an idyllic childhood. Karachi was a fantastic place as a child. It was benefiting from the tailwinds of British imperial India, and it was a great setup that the British left. Don't listen to anyone who says that actually there was a mess left in the subcontinent. There wasn't. Pakistan was a fantastic place when I was a child. There may have been problems with the partition, but actually Pakistan was a great place. Sadly, it got less peaceable as the years passed. And in 1977, Bhutto was deposed. He was the prime minister. He was deposed in a coup, and my parents got concerned about my education, and I was sent then to boarding school in England. And so from the age of 13, basically, I've been in England. Went to boarding school, then went to Cambridge University, studied natural sciences at Cambridge, did organic chemistry as my specialist subject, went into the city, as one does, having done a scientific degree. It was just after Maggie had deregulated the city, and we had Big Bang, and the world was your oyster if you're a young man. You know, I was part of that whole yuppie mode when I left university. It was a great time to leave. I joined a bank called Shearson Lehman Brothers, which subsequently became Lehman and went bust famously in 2008, long time after I left. And then I became finance director of a listed company, a Lloyd's reinsurance broker. Went into property development in my own right. I was supremely uninterested, as you might have noticed, in politics throughout my life. But I became interested in politics in 2016. I did not campaign to leave the EU. I wasn't that triggered, as I say, by politics then, but I became interested in it when Mark Carney said that there'd be a run on the banks if we left if we voted to leave the European Union. Not if we left, but if we just simply voted on the 23rd of June 2016 to leave, there'd be a run on the banks. And at that point, my antenna went up and I thought, right, there's something wrong with the establishment, because this guy, Mark Carney, is meant to be running the Bank of England. He's meant to be politically neutral. He shouldn't be talking nonsense. We all knew the banks were well capitalized. There was no impact that a vote to leave the EU would have had on the banks. And then I started writing kind of furious letters to the FT and the Telegraph saying that things aren't right. Leaving the EU will be a perfectly reasonable thing for the country to do. We can manage that process, all those kind of arguments. And then we won the referendum, which was amazing. And Theresa May became Prime Minister and she said all the right things. You know, no deal, nothing's agreed till everything's agreed. A bad deal is better than, no deal is better than a bad deal, and so on and so forth. And she said something else which really got my attention. And we can discuss it if you like. You might remember on the steps of 10 Downing Street when she took over as Prime Minister, she said, the vote for Brexit was the vote to leave the EU, because we didn't call it Brexit then. The vote to leave the EU was a vote by those in the country who are just about managing. The working and middle classes who've had the social contract broken, and we need to re-establish that social contract. And I thought, my God, she actually gets it. You know, there's been a repudiation, if you like, of the governing class's obligation to the people of this country. That's what had happened. And I thought this Prime Minister understands it. Anyway, she turned out to be a complete waste of time. I ended up joining. I got more and more triggered. The longer it took to leave the EU, the more obvious it became that our political class was against leaving the EU, even though the British people had directed them to do it, in the biggest democratic mandate in our history. Actually, I know that the Remainers like to say it was 52% to 48%, but it was 17.4 million people voted to leave the EU. Never before has there been such a sizable, profound vote for a constitutional change like that one. And our political class wasn't delivering it. So I joined Nigel Farage's Brexit party to try and get Brexit over the line, became an MEP. And I haven't been able to leave the political battlefield since. I'm still here fighting effectively to create an independent, prosperous and proud United Kingdom. We're still having that fight.
And good on you for that. So let's cover the reform story. Start, middle, end. Where was it going so well, and then how did it start going so wrong? For you and Nigel is particularly, I think, what people are going to want to know. That because I know that you've been at a loggerheads for the last 12 months at least.
Yeah, so the seeds of the differences between Nigel Farage and me go back to 2019. And you might recall, Liam, he stood down 317 Brexit Party candidates against the Tories. We did a unilateral surrender, if you like, to Boris Johnson. And we stood down in seats that included, for example, people like Theresa May, who should never have been allowed back into Parliament. And in standing down, the way Nigel Farage justified it was that if we don't stand down against Boris Johnson, we may get a Jeremy Corbyn government, and then there'll be a second referendum and we won't leave the European Union. And fine, I bought that argument. Fine. But we all knew that the withdrawal agreement that Boris Johnson had negotiated with the EU was an abomination of an agreement. It left Northern Ireland, part of the United Kingdom, in the EU, which for me is abhorrent at multiple levels, and we can discuss that if you'd like to. But I think any country that is prepared to throw part of its country under a bus, any governing class that's prepared to throw part of its country under a bus needs to be robustly held to account, challenged, and removed, frankly. And that's when things started to go wrong between me and Nigel Farage, because in 2020, we'd signed the withdrawal agreement. Northern Ireland had been left behind in the European Union, but we were negotiating, Boris Johnson was negotiating the trade agreement with the EU, and that negotiation was to take place during 2020. And I took Nigel Farage out for dinner with Rupert Lowe. Rupert Lowe, myself, and another gentleman called Robert Rowland, who has now sadly died, but was a very good man, took Nigel Farage out for dinner in August 2020, when we were momentarily unlocked, because this was during COVID. And at dinner, I said to Farage, look, we need you back in the political fray. We need you campaigning for a really good trade agreement. By good, what I mean is a minimalist trading agreement with the EU so that we can properly leave the wretched European Union, and through the process of the trade agreement, put right the ills of the withdrawal agreement. You know, find the withdrawal agreement's crap, but we're doing another deal now, so let's put it all right. And Nigel, we need you back on the field to hold Boris Johnson to account. Make sure Boris Johnson delivers. And Nigel said, well, it's all very well for you, Ben. You were born with a silver spoon rammed up your backside. I've had to represent the country in this battle for 20 years. As far as I'm concerned, Brexit's done. And Brexit was not done. If we wanted to leave the grip of the supranational order, if we wanted to make laws and govern the United Kingdom for the people of this country, for our own national interests, we had to get a proper Brexit. It was our only hope. And Mr. Brexit wasn't prepared to fight the fight. And so that was my first real understanding that something's not quite right with Nigel Farage. Then something else happened in November 2022, which was a big wake-up call for me. And it was this, that a guy called Christopher Harborne, who lives in Thailand, is a billionaire, I understand, donated £1 million to Boris Johnson. And that may be unremarkable to viewers, but this was the same Christopher Harborne who financed the Brexit Party. He put £14 million, by my estimates, behind the Brexit Party. Without Christopher Harborne, there was no Brexit Party. I spoke to Christopher Harborne a few times in 2019 and 2020, and he told me that he agreed with me that the withdrawal agreement was awful, that Boris Johnson was turning out to be a disaster. And why would he therefore then donate £1 million to him in November 2022 after he'd stood down as Prime Minister? Why would the gentleman who'd financed the Brexit Party, recognising Boris Johnson to be a disaster, give Boris Johnson £1 million? I can't come up with any good answers to that other than answers that take me to a very dark place. I began to think that there's a connection between Nigel Farage stepping down 317 candidates and putting Boris Johnson into power and the man who financed the Brexit Party donating £1 million to Boris Johnson. And why would you donate £1 million to Boris Johnson after he steps down as Prime Minister? If you're going to try and curry favour with him or get a knighthood or an ennoblement or whatever it is you might be after, you donate the money while he was Prime Minister. He did it afterwards. And to me, that smacked as some kind of payment for services rendered. And if you put it all together, you can only get to one answer. This is all in the public domain. This is all supposition. I'm not suggesting for a moment that there was anything nefarious going on. But when you put it together, there's no rational explanation other than bad ones. So when Richard Tice invited me to join join Reform, which was effectively the renamed Brexit Party, I said I would do it. But Nigel Farage, who owned the party, he had the majority interest in it. It was a limited company. He had the majority interest in it. I said I would want Nigel Farage to give up his shares because you can't have a political party owned by one man. And also I had in mind that I had concerns about Nigel Farage. I didn't want him being the controller of Reform. And Richard Tice spoke to Nigel Farage, and the answer I got back was, no, he's not prepared to give up his shares. So then I said, well, I want a letter then signed by you as leader, because Richard Tice was leader of Reform then, and Nigel Farage, saying that you will fight for a proper Brexit because we hadn't left, that you will fight to unite Northern Ireland with Great Britain so that our United Kingdom is once again secure, that you will do no dirty deals with the Tories, you won't stand down against the Tories like we did last time, and that you will run the party on a consensual basis. Even if Nigel Farage owns the shares, you will run the party on a consensual basis. Richard said, fine, I'll sign that. Let me go and speak to Nigel. And Nigel said he wasn't prepared to sign the letter. So then I called Nigel and I said, Nigel, why won't you sign the letter? And I had a kind of long discussion with him. And he said, well, look, Ben, Brexit's done. I don't need to sign a letter saying I'm going to fight for Brexit. It's done. And I said, well, Nigel, it ain't done because Northern Ireland's been left behind. And actually the trade agreement we then signed up to commits us to the European Convention of Human Rights, commits us to alignment with EU laws on state aid, competition, employment, commits us to environmental alignment with the EU. So we can't get out of net zero, for example, because of the trade agreement. I said, look, come on, Nigel. everything we've done prohibits Brexit. We haven't done it. He said, no, Brexit's done. And I said, well, I don't think it's done. So we had a point of disagreement on that. We had a point of disagreement over Christopher Harborne and the way the money went in 2019 and the donation to Boris Johnson in 2022. And then he said a couple of other things. So then I wrote an email, and I can send you a copy if you're interested. I wrote an email to Richard Tice in which I enumerated all of this. And I said, I've had the conversation with Nigel Farage. He's not going to sign the letter. And I disagree with him on this, and this. And therefore, I'm not joining Reform. That was on the 16th of March, 2023. Then I had Richard Tice on the phone. I had Anne Widdecombe on the phone and others on the phone saying, please join. You know, we need you to join. And I said, okay, fine. As long as Richard sends me that letter of comfort that I want, that we'll fight for Brexit, etc., and he confirms that Farage has read it, I will join. And the calculation I made, Liam, which was a miscalculation, was that he had just started GB News and so on. And I made the calculation that he wanted to make money and that he wouldn't come back into the party and that we could just get on and run the party even though he was the majority shareholder. And if I'd known Farage was coming back, I wouldn't have joined Reform. That is the truth of the matter. Of course, I kept that secret because I didn't think he was coming back, and it was Richard Tice and I. We were running the show. And we campaigned for the Reform Party. We took it from 6% in the polls to 16% when the general election was called. And then Nigel Farage came out on the morning of the general election, before our press conference, our general election press conference, at which Richard and I were going to declare, along with Anne Widdecombe, what we were going to do. Nigel Farage came out, he tweeted an hour and a half beforehand saying, I'm not going to be standing for Reform during this general election. And no one had asked that question. No one had assumed he was going to stand. But by putting a tweet out an hour and a half before our press conference, he basically made the whole press conference about why isn't Farage standing for Reform. And it would be the whole press conference, we were undermined. We were hit below the waterline, you know, before we'd even gone into battle. And I remember making a speech at that press conference in which I was actually quite shaken. I didn't speak well because I was shaken by the tweet that he'd put out. And then we had some argy-bargy, you know, private argy-bargy about what was going on. And wind the clock forward a couple of weeks, and Nigel Farage, realising actually that we were going to win seats in this general election, decided to appoint himself leader. No consultation with me. I wasn't even informed. I was the deputy leader of the party. I wasn't informed that he was coming back as leader. I found out, sitting behind my desk, watching the press conference that he had called that day to appoint himself leader, which of course he could do because he owned the shares in the party. And then at that point, I knew at that point my time in the party was probably limited, because I had all these differences with Farage, you know, fundamental ideological, political differences. But I still, I went through the general election, fought the general election, and during the process of the general election, I texted Richard Tice a few times, and said, the minute this general election is over, Richard, we have to democratise the party. The party has to go from being controlled by Farage to being a party of the members, because we can't have one individual behaving in this maverick way. And I thought it deeply maverick to say 1 minute you're not standing, the next minute you come back as leader, turf out the candidate in Clacton, nice guy called Tony Mack, who was thrown out, lost, you know, quite a lot of money that he'd put into his campaign and so on. And then when we came out of the general election, I fought the campaign for the democratisation of Reform. Unsuccessfully, because the party is still not democratised. Whatever 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐽 and Nigel Farage tell you about the structure of Reform, it is not democratised. It is still controlled by those two gentlemen. The members cannot get rid of Farage, even if they want to. It can't happen, and I can explain why if people are interested. But just take it for the purposes of this discussion right now, that it is not a democratised party. And then Farage started saying really weird things. So the big wake-up call, I think, for people who weren't close to Farage was the Steve Edgington interview. Did you see that? The one that he had with Steve, in which he said he wasn't concerned about the rate of demographic change in the country, that actually he wasn't in favor of the deportation of all illegal migrants that are here. Then he did a famous interview with Winston Marshall, in which he accepted that by 2070 the majority of the country would be, Muslim, and that we can't make a stand. We can't politically alienate Islam for fear of the consequences of it. And he started doing weird things like putting forward candidates like Charlie Mullins, if you know who I mean, who was founded Pimlico Plumbers, great entrepreneur. But Charlie Mullins, on the day that he was suggested as a candidate for reform, came out saying he would rejoin the EU. If he was given a chance to vote again, he'd join the EU. So Farage was bringing into the party people who are Remainers and still Remainers. And it's not that I've got anything against Remainers, but if you're of the mindset that the UK should be part of the EU, you're not of the mindset that the UK should be an independent, sovereign country. And I am of that mindset. And reform was meant to be of that mindset. And what it reveals to you, if you put all of this together, what it reveals is that Farage is a political expedient. He doesn't have a political philosophy. He'll get on any bandwagon that he feels he's got to get on in order to curry favour for his own personal popularity. He is the ultimate in political expediency. And what he's now trying to do is to rush for office, garnering as much support from all parts of the political spectrum, promising things to people, promising things against which he should be standing for the betterment of the country, in order simply to get into office. Now, what he might say is, Ben, you're a bit of an idealistic twit, because unless I get into office, I can't deliver the agenda that you want delivered. But what I say back in return is, Nigel, you haven't got a very good track record in staying true to what you believe in. But moreover, the time for political expediency has gone. There's been too much political expediency in this country for too long. Tony Blair, political expedient, promised certain things, did the opposite. And as a result of Tony Blair's foundational changes to the constitution of this country and successive governments building on the damage that Tony Blair did, we have ended up in, I think, facing potentially the end of the United Kingdom. And this is no time for political expediency now. This is a time for serious principled politics, where you set out what your agenda is, you make it abundantly clear what you believe in, and then you sell that vision to the British people, and you hope that they'll back you for that vision. If you get into office on a false premise, particularly if you're the kind of individual that Farage is, who blows this way and that way, you will not deliver what's required. You will just be a waste of time. And we do not need a waste of time Prime Minister. We need someone, the next government of the United Kingdom, if the United Kingdom is to be saved, has to have a front bench, has to have a cabinet that is 12 Hercules. The brain power that's now going to be required, the fortitude that's going to be required, the fearlessness that's going to be required of the next government, if we are to save the United Kingdom, is going to dwarf all those required qualities of any past cabinet. The task is massive, Liam, to save this country. And what we can't have is a political expedient just going to cocktail parties talking nonsense. We need someone with absolute conviction and capability as Prime Minister, and we need him to have a cabinet of similar, capable, fearless people. And Farage is not creating that. You look at reform now. Reform is Farage and Farage is reform. Even reformers say it. They say it. Reform has become a cult of Farage. And Farage, the persona of Farage, may be anti-immigration, pro-British and all of that. He wears his Union flag socks to drive that image home. But the reality of Farage is the opposite. If Farage believed in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, he would have stood shoulder to shoulder with me in 2020 when I was fighting to get rid of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Why wasn't he fighting to get Northern Ireland back into the Union? And again, people might say, but Ben, that's a minority sport. It's not a minority sport. When part of your country's been given over to a foreign power, those are the kinds of things that cause a war, Liam. Most countries go to war over that. And we've timidly handed over over 1 million British citizens to the European Union. Farage needs to make that case. He needs to make it vehemently. He doesn't. He's on the record saying a united Ireland is inevitable. He's on the record saying he's happy to share a platform with Mary Lou MacDonald, the head of Sinn Féin, an apologist for the IRA. How can we save the country with the Prime Minister with those views? So that's what got me to where I am now. I left Reform. Sorry, you asked me to bring you up to speed. That was a very long exposition. Forgive me.
This is why we do the long format, because you get a much better understanding. You really get to hear someone's side when you're not against the clock and you've just got to deliver sound bites. So that paints a very interesting picture to me. So what was the final straw? So you left, you wasn't pushed, you left?
Yeah, so I was sacked as Deputy Leader of the party by Farage, but then I left the party in November 28th of November 2024, after I heard Farage saying he's not concerned about the rate of demographic change, he wouldn't deport all illegal migrants, and there are a whole host of other things. But the final straw for me was when I heard that Farage had banned Reform members across the country from speaking to me. And I thought, I mean, this guy is meant to stand for democracy. You know, whatever he thinks of me, I help put Reform on the map. I have a right to meet members in Reform. And I thought, if I've got no right to meet my own membership, I'm out. So I resigned on the 28th of November 2024. And I knew then, and I knew before then actually, that a new political force was required in British politics, because Reform is not the answer. It pretends to be the answer. It ain't the answer. It doesn't have the political philosophy. It doesn't have the intellectual heft. It doesn't have the fearlessness. Farage is fundamentally a political expedient. And to be a political expedient, sorry to go on about it, means you're essentially a coward, because you're blowing this way and that way. We need lions. He's cunning as hell, but we don't want a fox. We want a lion. And that's the difference. And so I knew then we needed a new political force, but there wasn't room for it. You know, Reform was riding high, and Reform in many ways is still riding high. But Rupert Lowe happened, you know, the way they threw Rupert Lowe out of the party, they tried to get him imprisoned and so on. And paradoxically, their thumping victory in the local elections, Reform's thumping victory in the local elections, encouraged me to set up the new party, because I could see, and I'm absolutely certain of this, that the electorate have broken their cultural propensity to vote either Labour or Conservative. They are now, the electorate are aware that they've been hoodwinked repeatedly. And I think many of them have voted for Reform because there was no real serious principled political party to vote for. They wanted to give a good kicking to Labour and the Conservatives. But I think if we can get Advance UK, this new party I've launched, if we can make the arguments that I think need to be made for a proud, independent, prosperous United Kingdom, and we can convey those arguments to the electorate, I think the electorate will ditch Reform and they will back Advance UK.
Well, now that you're fired up and ready to go, let me ask.
I fired myself up.
You fired yourself up. You look like he's having a good time.
Yeah.
Do you despise Nigel Farage?
I have no animosity towards Nigel Farage whatsoever. I have no animosity to Boris Johnson whatsoever. I was a vocal critic of Boris Johnson's. I'm sure, I think I'd rather have a drink probably with Boris than with Nigel. But I think they're great guys to go out and have a beer with or whatever. But that's not the point. We are facing existential threat in this country. We are facing the end of our existence. The supranational global order, which is what has taken down our borders, which has normalized mass immigration, which has normalized illegal migration, which has normalized this country making regulations and laws which don't benefit its people but benefit other people. That supranational order has to be removed, and Farage is not the man to do it.
Is Advance UK a revenge party?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not a revenge party. What I would say to Nigel Farage is there's still time to put Ben Habib out of business, and I invite you to put me out of business. And the best way to put me out of business, Mr. Farage, is to democratise Reform UK. I've put out a fantastic constitution for Advance, which is very democratic, but still protects the party from entryism and being hijacked by, malign forces. Read my constitution, Nigel. Adopt a constitution similar to that in reform so your members get a proper voice. And adopt the mission statement that I've set out for Advance UK. Get some great people into your party. Stop throwing patriots under a bus. Stop throwing people that have tweeted something with which you disagree 4 years ago. Stop throwing them under a bus. Become robust. Stand for the nation state of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Stand for free speech. Stand for democracy. Stand for equality before the law, which, by the way, I can explain he doesn't. Stand for these 4 basic principles, and I will vacate the field. Put me out of business.
So are you doing this to apply pressure on him?
No.
To make him do the job properly?
No.
You want to go all the way with this?
I'm going there is no point getting into a fight unless you're prepared to go all the way.
And it's been suggested that this is the Ben Habib ego party.
There's no ego. I'm 60 years old. Let me tell you about ego. I was telling you this, I think, just earlier. On the way here, a dear friend of mine was asking me, why the hell are you doing this, Ben? You're 60 years old. You got a bit of dosh. I've made money. I'm lucky. I've made money. And by the way, I didn't have a silver spoon rammed up my arse. I had a pretty humble beginning. I know I went to a private school, but my father worked his socks off to put me through private school, and I was very well aware of the many sacrifices he made for my privilege. But I have made money. I have done well in my life. I'm 60 years old, as I've said a couple of times in this interview. I don't need this. Unlike some people, actually enjoy the beach. I would like to go to the beach. I'd like to get up every morning, go to the gym, have a cafe latte, sit on a beach, wait for 6 o'clock, have a double gin and tonic, have a nice meal and go to bed. I would love that and watch Netflix from time to time. I would absolutely love that. The reason I'm on the battlefield is because I feel obliged to the British people whom I made the case for Brexit. I didn't campaign for Brexit in 2016, but I fought for it in 2019. And I feel duty-bound not to leave the battlefield until that vision is delivered. That is why I'm here. It is not a sense of ambition and ego that puts me here. It is a sense of pressure and obligation that puts me here. I feel pressure. I feel under pressure to do what I have to do. It's a sense of duty. By the way, I didn't want to lead Advance UK. I know I'm leader now, but I didn't want to lead Advance UK. I wanted Rupert Lowe to lead it. But after lengthy discussions, he decided he didn't want to be in a political party. He wanted to do his own movement.
I was going to ask you about Rupert Lowe's involvement, and because it seems clear that he's not going to join your party.
But just on the ego point, if I was egotistical, I would have been saying to Rupert, I'm going to lead it. You come in as my deputy or joint leader or whatever. No. I wanted him to be leader. I wanted to set up a party that had the ability to represent the British people, had the intellectual heft and the fearlessness to do it. That's what I wanted to do, and that's what I hope I've done. But I wanted Rupert to lead it. It's not about ego. It's about delivering for the country. And the only way, and just again on the ego point, as I've said a couple of times, the only way to deliver for the country is to get a bunch of lions together, get a bunch of Hercules together. That's not egotistical. It's when you put yourself forward as the sole guy who's going to be doing it. That's egotistical. And there's one individual who we've mentioned many, many times who is the sole guy. He doesn't surround himself with Hercules. He's the sole guy. So it's not my ego.
Well, we had Godfrey Bloom on recently, spoke very well of you, spoke very well of Rupert, and he was backing reform, to the best of my knowledge. But the final straw for him with Nigel was when he got rid of you and Rupert. He thought, well, why would you get rid of 2 key players? It doesn't make sense.
No, but it is the Nigel Farage dog and pony show. This is all about... So I'm going to say something which many viewers will question. I'm not even convinced Nigel ever believed in leaving the EU. I'm not convinced about it. I think he's so cunning, he realised that actually making the argument to leave the EU would give him an assured place in the European Parliament, which is a proportional representation system. And if he could represent the minority in the United Kingdom who wished to leave the EU, he could guarantee himself a place in politics for 20 years. And let me tell you, the package they give you in the EU Parliament is cushy. When I was there, the total package was worth about €500,000 a year, just to sit around doing nothing. Okay? So it's a very cushy number being a member of Parliament there. And the reason I say say that he may never have even believed in leaving the EU is all the things that I've said already about his mercurial, unpredictable nature and his lack of political philosophy, but primarily also this, that if you believed in leaving the European Union, you really believed in it, when you won the referendum, you wouldn't have vacated the field. You would have stood your ground. That was the time when Farage should have come into his own and said, great, we've won the referendum. Now, this is what the British government needs to do to deliver. We need to do this to our constitutional system. We need to, these acts of parliament, we need to deregulate this. We need to cut these taxes, whatever. He would have then been on the front foot, energized by the fact that we've left the EU, giving his vision of what the United Kingdom should then be. But instead of doing that, instead of being enthused by the prospect of leaving the EU, he said, well, I've done my job. I'm going to retire. And then the other bit of evidence I have, which is my personal evidence, is what I've already told you earlier in this programme, that in 2020, when Brexit was being defeated by Boris Johnson through the deals that he was doing with the EU, Farage was nowhere to be seen. Why wasn't he fighting for Brexit when it was crucial to get the right deal, to get a deal that would deliver us out of the EU? He knows the deal's crap. If you look at the 2019 clips of Farage, he keeps saying the withdrawal agreement's rubbish, the withdrawal agreement's rubbish, the withdrawal agreement's rubbish, and then he goes and endorses it. Even today, Liam, he won't say that Brexit's not done. He says Brexit's done, we just haven't done it properly. I'm telling you, Brexit's not done. We are still part of the EU in many, many respects. And Starmer is able to do more damage to the UK and take us even further into the EU because we never left properly in the first place. And these battles need to be won because we will not be a proud, independent, sovereign country with borders, with an integrated, homogeneous, settled culture, unless we can get rid of the supranational order. They're absolutely inextricably linked.
Do you think now with Advance UK, you are going to war with Farage?
I'm not going to war with Farage any more than I'm going to war with Labour or the Conservatives or, frankly, the Liberal Democrats and Green Party.
And who are you fighting for?
I am fighting for my vision, which I think is shared by the electorate, as I say, of a proud, independent, sovereign, prosperous United Kingdom. I'm fighting for the nation-state of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in all its parts and for all its people. I'm fighting for the recognition that we are constitutionally a Christian country. I'm fighting for freedom of speech, which is the cornerstone of democracy and without which we will not be able to progress as a civilization. When you dumb down freedom of speech, you make it impossible for us to have debates about the salient issues that challenge the country. And we can talk about Tommy Robinson in due course, but he's been championing, as we all know, as viewers will all know, the fight against the gangs for many years before other people were, on that battle pitch. And he was shut down. He was cancelled because it was an uncomfortable conversation for the nation to have. And because freedom of speech was shut down, the government and the other institutions that govern us didn't do the right thing by the victims. Freedom of speech is crucial in order to be able to govern our country for its betterment.
How would you handle the new inquiry?
The national inquiry that
Starmer's going to reopen or redo.
Yeah. So
how would you handle that?
Truth be told, fine, we can have the inquiry. Truth be told, I don't think there's an inquiry is needed. What I think is needed is a branch of law enforcement to be established to identify the perpetrators and the accomplices in the perpetration of those crimes and arrest them, charge them, and incarcerate them. An inquiry, I think, will be used, I'm convinced, will be used by the government to cover it all up again. Inquiries are a great way to chuck stuff into the long grass and then tell the British people, well, we looked at it, there was nothing to see there. Like the inquiry into the Iraq War. How could any sane individual think that the Iraq War was justified, and yet the inquiry which took place afterwards found no wrongdoing by the Blair government? He lied to us. The Prime Minister lied to us about weapons of mass destruction. We went to war. Many of the problems we face in this country today, many of the problems faced in the Middle East are because of the 2003 intervention in Iraq. It was an illegal war. There was no justification for it. Tony Blair should have gone to prison. And yet the inquiry hushed it up. So I think the inquiry is a red herring. We know rape took place. We know young white girls were targeted. We know that law enforcement, community services, health services, educational establishments all knew and didn't do anything about it. We know there's been a massive cover-up. We know that. So why are we doing an inquiry? Get a dedicated, and I say dedicated because you need to create a law enforcement unit that itself isn't hijacked by the forces that hijacked all those other institutions. Create a dedicated law enforcement unit to investigate what the hell went on, who did it, arrest the bastards.
Send them to jail, hold them accountable.
Yeah.
Totally agree. How are you going to win the hearts of the working class? 'Cause I think they're the ones that feel like they've been forgotten and also promised the world, and then slowly but surely they're realising they're being forgotten again.
Yeah. So it's critical that any government represents the people, because if you don't understand as a governor, as a member of the government, that it is the working and middle classes who are the majority of the people, and you should be making laws and passing fiscal programs and whatever, which are for their betterment. If you don't get that, that means you're in opposition to the people. And that means we're not living in a proper democracy. And that's what we've had a lot of over the last 30 years. That's what I mean by the supranational order. They have stood against the working and middle classes of the United Kingdom. The supranational order stands against the people of the United Kingdom. It doesn't see British citizens as being important. That's why we have mass immigration. Because if you're part of the supranational order, you see all of humanity as being equal. And that means citizenry doesn't matter, which is why people like Starmer, who completely buy into the supranational order, being part of the EU, they love all that stuff. That's why they don't see any problem with immigration. That's why they're incapable of stopping illegal migration, because they don't think your rights, Liam, as a British citizen, are any greater than the rights of any other human being in the world. And so you've got to, as a matter of principle, understand that you have to represent the working and middle classes if you're going to be in politics in a democracy. And you've got to represent your country. Citizenry is critical. It's got to be at the heart of your understanding of where your obligations are. If you don't understand that you're obliged to your citizens, you understand nothing. So that's my philosophy about why I should represent the working and middle classes.
What have you got in common with them?
What have I got in common? A love of the country. I don't think I need to have walked the walk that they've walked in order to have the same love of the country, to understand what's required to be done in order to save the country. I have a deep love of this country. If you were, I know I'm half Pakistani, my skin is brown, but if you were to cut my veins, I think I would bleed red, white and blue. And that's it. And can I just make a distinction, by the way? When I say working class, I mean working class. I don't mean people who are playing the benefit system. You know, I think we've got to be clear. Starmer makes the mistake of thinking that when he represents, you know, and there are a lot of people who are on benefits, shouldn't be on benefits. He thinks when he's representing them, he's representing the working class. He's not. The working class are people who are working, who want to work. And it's critical for the prosperity of the country that the working class do well. I mean, if you haven't got the ability for the working class, just let's do economics for a second. If the working class can't, through their own endeavours, move through the social stratas, enrich themselves and make sure that their children have a future that, if they can't have aspiration, if they can't wake up every morning thinking the future is bright, the future for their children is bright, they won't work. They'll be dumbed down into submission. And that's what's happening with the British people. And if we're all dumbed down, if the working middle classes are dumbed down into submission, the economy of the United Kingdom will fail. And that's where we're at. And we'll all fail. Even people who are at the top, the top 1%, the top 2% of the wealth in this country, they will suffer. The working middle class have to do well. The country has to do well for the rich to do well. We're all in this together.
Would you say you were streetwise?
I'm probably naive.
That is the best answer I've ever heard from a politician ever. And I'm going to put that on record now. Do you know why?
Why?
You didn't try and bullshit me.
Yeah.
That was a real nice answer. And if people don't appreciate that honesty, then they're missing a trick, because we're sick of being lied to. So, and that follows on nicely to my next question that I've got in mind. So, by your own admission, you've not been brought up on the streets on a rough council estate, potentially getting jumped on the street corner, getting a glass shoved in your face in the local pub, like living in
No, I haven't done
absolute poverty and just a horrible way of life that you're born into. You can't help, and you've got to deal with what surrounds you. Very tough. And if you haven't been born into that, you can't understand it, and you can't be blamed for not understanding it. So here's the thing. By your own admission, you're not streetwise. Would you employ or take on or recruit an advisor that was politically savvy and streetwise, so you get to see the world through their eyes?
Of course, you have to. You have to understand it as best you can.
But does anybody else do that?
Well, I don't know whether they do or not.
I've not seen it.
No, but that's why I say you need a team of Hercules. That's why I don't. We haven't talked about the structure of my party, but you have the members. I'll just briefly talk about the structure of this new party. So we have the members, but above the members, elected by the members, we have something called a college. And the college includes people who are not taking a shilling from the party, so that they're in it because they believe in it. A lot of political interests are skewed by taking money from parties or from through their elected office or whatever. The college will be people who are not paid by the party, do not hold office. They're just there because they are these brave, capable, fearless people that we need in order to keep the party philosophically, on the straight and narrow, and that the leadership and the executive actually do what they're meant to be doing. And that body of people will work with the leadership to create the policies that are required in order to deliver our vision, and then the acts of parliament, etc., that need to be drafted in order to enact it. That body of people will be drawn on from all parts of the United Kingdom, and so I mean, for example, I don't think I'm breaching a confidence because this is all going to be made public. But David Rhodes is a member of our college, and Paul Thorpe is a member of our college. I mean, Paul, I think, would to any individual looks, feels, and behaves like a working class guy. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter to me, which side of the tracks you came from. What matters to me is that you're bright, capable, hardworking, committed to this. This is for the college. Committed to this country, share the vision that we share in the party, and you're fearless. That's what I want.
Let's talk about a few policies for Advance UK. So have you got a migration policy? So
the policies are going to be made once we have the whole college up and running. We haven't made policies yet, okay? This is something that, again, I think Reform gets slightly wrong because they just come out with policies without having discussed it with anyone. But I can tell you roughly what our migration policy would be, if you're interested.
People are sick of migration. This is what they want to hear.
Yeah, okay, so there are two aspects to migration. There's mass legal migration, and then there's illegal migration. So as far as mass legal migration is concerned, the first thing that an incoming government needs to do, the first thing, and it can be done instantly, is to have a moratorium on indefinite leave to remain and on the granting of British citizenship. Because we don't actually, I'm sure the frank, honest admission from government, if it were to admit it, is that we don't know how many people are in this country from abroad. We don't really have a handle on it. And the presumption of being given the right to stay, and the presumption even of getting a British passport, is that, if you've been here long enough, you get it. And if that presumption continues, the country will cease to look, feel, and behave like a British organism. It will become part of this morass of globalism, which is a nothing. It's a non-state. But I think the first step is a moratorium on indefinite leave to remain and British citizenship. So that means that you can then use the time that you've created to identify who shouldn't be here and make sure that they leave, number one. Number two, you need to make a clear gap between what you can get on benefits and what the working class earn. And at the moment, the gap isn't big enough. we've got 7.7 million people on universal credit, surviving, 3 million of whom aren't even looking for a job, claiming mental health issues, 1.5 million of whom are looking for a job and surviving on universal credit, and the rest of them are working but surviving on a top-up of universal credit. We've got to enrich that class of people through work. They need to be promoted into the workforce. And the way you do that is by cutting taxes on the working and middle classes, so it's more attractive to work. But also you have to take benefits away. There has to be some tough love. You've got to cut our benefits bill back because we are, apart from anything else, we're spending so much money we won't survive as a country. Over £300 billion a year being spent on benefits. Starmer couldn't cut £5 billion the other day. That's 1.6% of the benefits bill. He couldn't cut 1.6%. And we've got over £300 billion bill that needs to be cut back. If you cut the benefits that an individual gets and so that it's not that attractive to be on benefits, and you cut taxes, the gap between what you get on benefits and what you earn gets bigger. So you work. Are you with me? You choose to work. If you choose to work, this nonsense narrative that we need to bring in foreigners in order to do jobs that Brits don't do disappears. Bringing in cheap, unskilled labour, that argument disappears. So you would automatically start fixing the economic organism and getting Brits into work, and the need for foreigners would diminish, number one. Number two, we should set a minimum wage for anyone coming into this country to be given a visa. And at the moment, the minimum wage is set at £38,000 per annum. The median wage in this country is about £33,000. We need to take that up to a figure of £80,000 or thereabouts, so that you have to be in the top 5% of earners in the UK in order to qualify to come to this country to work. The other thing that you need to do, and that, by the way, will force wages up. There will be a period of inflation in the UK as wages rise because we haven't got the foreign, cheap, unskilled labour that we were relying on because we forced the minimum wage up that they have to earn to justify being given a visa.
Kind of a score system to make sure that they actually contribute towards the economy as opposed to suck from it.
Yeah, effectively. I mean, at the moment, what we've got is...
I think we'd all like that in place.
Yeah, so what we've got at the moment is people coming in, illegal migrants, going on bicycles, doing Deliveroo work or whatever it is, basically doing work probably below the legal requirements for a minimum wage in this country and making it impossible for British people. The wages go so low that why would you work? Because you can get that on benefits. Are you with me? Why would you break your back on a Deliveroo bike for 12 hours a day when you can get the same amount of money on benefits? So you've got to the extent that you have immigration, it's got to be of people who are really well educated, who add something to British society. I see no benefit in a Deliveroo cycle rider for the British economy. I see no benefit. None. There should be no dependents coming with them when they come on a work visa or for university. At the moment, you can bring your whole flipping family with you. That's got to stop. You've got to prohibit anyone who's not British getting benefits. There are 1.5 million foreigners in this country taking benefits. That's absolutely crazy. Of course, that's going to have a pull on people from abroad into the country. So that's a handful of policies that you could use to stop mass legal migration. Then as far as illegal migration is concerned, there's got to be the first thing you've got to do is you've got to repeal the Human Rights Act, which Tony Blair put in place. You've got to get rid of the European Convention of Human Rights, which is now serving, as I say, to set aside the interests of British citizens and are serving foreigners. Actually, when you couple the Human Rights Act with the Equalities Act, which is anything but creating an equal society, the Equalities Act basically requires progressive discrimination in favour of ethnic minorities and other minorities. When you couple progressive discrimination with the Human Rights Act, which basically sets aside the importance of being a British citizen because all human beings are absolutely equal in all respects, progressive discrimination coupled with this and mass migration means that British citizens go down to the back of the queue. Are you with me? So you've got to get rid of the Equalities Act. You've got to get rid of the Human Rights Act. And then having done that, you have to rediscover the very old-fashioned, quaint notion that in order to have borders that work, they need to be physically enforced. Everyone talks about illegal migration through the prism of deportation. They all say, well, we need to be able to deport them. Of course, you need to be able to deport them. But there's a stage before they even get to your country, which is we need a dedicated force in the Channel, which will intercept these boats and send them back to France. These people are not fleeing war-torn countries. And even if they were, they don't have a right to come to this country illegally. Anyone crossing the Channel to come to this country is coming in illegally. So they need to be stopped. If you try and cross the border just about in any other sane country in the world without having the requisite right to do so, you will probably have a gun pointed at you. The Poles do it to the Belarusians. They built a fence and they put the Polish army behind it. And they will shoot if you try and cross the border.
To kill.
To kill or maybe warn or whatever. But they've put the army there and they're armed, you know. And so the would-be illegal migrants trying to get into Poland know what they're going to meet. And we've got to discover that. It's a physical thing. And then if they do get through and onto UK shores, then they need to be arrested. They need to be detained in facilities for detainment. And then they need to be deported. And if they're countries that they come from where we don't have a deportation agreement, then those countries need to have aid removed if we're giving them aid, or we need to cease trading with them or impose tariffs on them and take actions against countries that won't take back their own people. So that's how I would deal with illegal migration. Does that answer the question? I mean, so we don't have a policy yet in the party, but I suspect that's the kind of policy that we would come out with.
I was interested in how you would distribute benefits, or if you would distribute benefits to migrants.
None. No, they have to be in prison. We have to understand that they're called illegal migrants because they've broken the law to come into the country.
How can that be so hard for people to fathom?
I don't know.
Because it seems to be a real problem to get into people's heads.
Well, I say I don't know. I do know. The Human Rights Act that Tony Blair put in place is the embodiment of the European Convention of Human Rights in British law. So they took the 𝐸𝐶HR and they put it into British law and they made the European Court of Human Rights the supreme judicial body, a foreign court, the supreme judicial body for human rights in this country. Now, we had a very fine understanding already in 1996, 1997, before Blair came to office. We had a very fine understanding and a perfectly established set of rules and regulations which collectively assured us all our human rights. What those laws before 1997 didn't do was set aside what it means to be British. We all knew that if you had a British passport, you had privileges. It was the best passport to have in the world, perhaps. When the Human Rights Act came in, it basically said all humanity is equal. It set aside being a British citizen. Are you with me, Liam? So it was really pernicious. And when you set aside what it means to be a British citizen, it's a hop and a skip to being unable to enforce your borders because all people are equal. So why the hell would you enforce how dare you enforce your borders? These people have every bloody right to be here, just as much right as British citizens do under the Human Rights Act. I'm not saying that. That's what the Human Rights Act dictates. So the government's been hijacked by it. It can't get its head round. And so when people say, you would have heard this said, what does it mean to being British? Come on, you guys all bang on about being what it means to be British. Well, what does it mean? And then the kind of answers you get nowadays are codified. They're codified from the Human Rights Act. They've lost a connection with our cultural roots. They've been set aside by the codification, European law, in our body of law. So I'll tell you how I know I'm British. You asked me, why the hell do I feel the way I feel? I know I'm British because I feel stirred when I think about Nelson's victory at Trafalgar. I feel stirred when I think about the fortitude that we showed in World War I and World War II, that the sacrifices we made in order to protect our constitution, our culture and our liberty. I'm proud of the British Empire. I'm proud. I grew up in as I said, I was born in post-imperial British India, and it was a great place to be. I'm proud of the British Empire. When I was brought up, I don't know, you are younger than me and you may not have had these. Did you ever read Commando mags?
No.
Do you know what I mean by a
I
Commando
was
mag?
reading different mags when I was younger.
No, this is at the age of 12 or 13.
That's what I mean.
Really? Oh, my God. Okay.
I had to grow up quick.
But anyway, we had black and white mags called Commando mags. They were sort of little things, and they were all about killing Nazis, the Englanders killing Nazis. And so I just grew up knowing that this country, it's the best country. It may not be the greatest country. It may not be the most powerful. It was the best country. It was the most powerful, and it was the greatest. And that's the other thing I reject, by the way. People say, oh, it's impossible for us to survive outside the EU. We simply don't have all the resources that's required to do it. We bloody well did it for centuries. We were powerful. And I want a resurgent United Kingdom. I want a powerful United Kingdom. I want a United Kingdom which, frankly, when it gets upset, will scare the rest of the world. I want to be like the US. Why not? Why can't we be like that? Why do we have to accept that we're going to be second best all the time? We hear the expression managed decline. We're not even experiencing managed decline. We're just experiencing decline, rapid decline.
Free falling.
Free falling, yeah. So, I reject all of that. And so coming back to the point, we all knew what being British meant. It didn't have to be defined for us. We knew it. It was in our system. But the codification of human rights and all the subsequent legislation that's come with it has removed what it means to be British. And in fact, you are now classified as far right if you think of yourself as British. I want to talk about right and left in a second. I think it's a really important discussion to have because before we came on, you mentioned, right wing and right wing. Can I have that discussion now? Mm-hmm. There's no such thing as right wing. It's a misapplication of a political term. It's a convenient term coined by those people who wish to rubbish those of us who believe in our country. It's very convenient. So the basic argument goes, oh, you're anti-immigration, so you're anti all these poor people who deserve our protection. Again, this kind of codified thinking coming through from European law. And therefore, you're an awful human being, you're right wing. And when they say that you're right wing, effectively, they do it so that they can then say, if you're a fervent believer in your country, if you wear the Union flag, if you bleed red, white and blue or the St. George's flag, or you're far right. Because they want to discredit you. They want to make you an extreme. They want to put you on a part of the political spectrum, any part of the political spectrum, just so they can rubbish you. It's designed to rubbish you. I'm not on a political spectrum. I hope this has come across to viewers. I'm not on a political spectrum. I believe in making policies for a proud, independent, prosperous United Kingdom in all its parts and all its people. That does not make me right-wing. Those people who want to govern for the global good, who want to be part of the supranational order, who keep saying things like, and you would have heard it a million times, oh, we can't do that because that breaches international law. Oh, we can't do that because, our obligations under this treaty or that treaty prohibit us from doing it. I say to hell with all of that. That I reject that. That is the end of the United Kingdom. That set of beliefs is the end of the I believe that we should ditch the supranational institutions to a very significant extent. We should rip international law out of the body of domestic law, dissolve all the quangos that we've created, which has taken power away from Parliament and accountability from Parliament and invested it in bureaucrats like the Electoral Commission, Ofcom, the OBR. All these bodies serve to dilute, and the Bank of England, by the way, they serve to dilute our democracy. What we want are those bastards in Parliament wholly responsible for governing us, so that when they screw up, we know who screwed up and we can change them. And I'm part of that. But that's not right wing.
It's the common sense wing.
It's the common sense wing. And what does the party stand for? Nation state, freedom of speech, democracy and equality under the law. How is that right wing? Every government of any political hue should buy into those 4 mission statements.
Well, it's right wing because it's not communism.
Because it's not communism. Starmer is anti-British. Starmer is anti-British. Now, I've been on many shows and I've said that, and people roll their eyes at me and they say, why do you say he's anti-British?
Even Ray Charles can see that.
Yeah, absolutely. He's anti-British. He wants to take us back into the EU. He's taking our military back in. When he talks about military cooperation, Liam, what he means is us joining the European Defence Union so that we will be under the control of Brussels. We won't have an independent military. When he talks about making it easier for us to trade with the EU, what he's doing is adopting EU laws and regulations which will be adjudicated by the EU. He's stripping power away from the United Kingdom. When he talks about letting the youth of the European Union come to the United Kingdom more easily, he's talking about freedom of movement. He's talking about taking down our borders. And
he's a dangerous man.
Oh, they're very dangerous. They are the damage they've done in 6 months of government is vast. And I know we discussed this again before we came on. And the fact that Rachel Reeves could sit in Parliament crying for her own whatever her personal issue was and sheds no tears for all the damage she's done to British businesses, to the British worker, to our prospects as a country. She doesn't have any tears for that, for our pensioners. No tears for them. But she had a personal issue which brought her to tears.
Did you feel any empathy at all for her?
None. I was repulsed by the scene.
Did you think, fuck her?
No, I didn't think fuck her. I didn't think fuck her, but I thought she has no right to be on the front bench of a British government. As I say, we need people with fortitude, great thinking and fearlessness.
Are you ruthless enough to get the job done?
You don't have to be ruthless. You need to be bloody stubborn. You need to be capable and fearless and stubborn.
Can you be ruthless if needs be?
What do you mean by ruthless?
Well, I think if you're going up against someone like Farage,
Yeah.
who you've explained to be disingenuous,
I will just keep telling the truth. He's going to attack me. He's already attacked me. He'll go on attacking me. He'll find other grounds on which to attack me. I will stay firm.
I was going to ask that. Do you think there's going to be a smear campaign
I'm sure.
coming from Nigel for you?
Absolutely.
Have you got any skeletons in your closet he might find?
None. I'm so boring. That was one of the great advantages of my dull life.
You can tell me the truth and no one will know.
Yeah. No. No. I've got nothing about which I'm ashamed. Nothing. I'm divorced. I suppose I'm ashamed of that, but that's public info.
Do you think Nigel's capable of making things up? I know he is because I've seen it with my own eyes and heard it with my own ears, but are you aware of any exaggerated truths or outright lies he's told?
Absolutely. I mean, what do you think the whole Rupert Lowe thing was? I mean, Nigel is clever enough not to have been the man who voiced all those complaints, but we all know that it was Farage behind the complaints.
As opposed to 𝐬𝐿𝐫𝐿.
You think 𝐬𝐿𝐫𝐿 made a police complaint without asking Nigel Farage whether he should do it?
Absolutely not.
No, absolutely not. Do you think those charges of bullying and all that, do you think Lee Anderson made that statement without clearing it with Nigel Farage? Absolutely not. A lot of people say to me, oh, Farage doesn't do the detail. That wasn't him, that was 𝐬𝐿𝐫𝐿. I say, bullshit. It's the same with Boris Johnson. People used to, I was a vocal critic, as I said, of Boris Johnson. And people said, Ben, you're getting Boris wrong. He's a nice guy. It wasn't him who did it. It was someone else. I said, bullshit.
What would you say to people that were accusing you of splitting the vote?
So in order to split the vote, you have to accept the notion that there is a right wing in which to split the vote. But as I say, there is no right of politics. The Conservative Party is not right wing. The Conservative Party sits in the supranational order. The Conservative Party has lost its understanding of what it means to be conservative. It's actually the full name of the party is Conservative and Unionist Party. They're definitely not Unionist. It was a Conservative Party that put a border down the middle of the Irish Sea. I'm not taking any votes away. If let's just, for the sake of this discussion, just accept the term right wing, just because it makes the discussion easier. That's why it's such a difficult thing to reject, because it makes discussions easier. But let's just say we accept there's a right wing. The Conservative Party ain't part of it. It's part of the left wing. It's Liberal Democrat at best. Nigel Farage, is he right wing? I don't know what Nigel is. I don't think he has a political philosophy. I think he'll waver this way and that way.
I see a lot of flip-flopping with Farage and chopping and changing his mind and going back on his word. And it's very easy to forget when he comes out on the charm offensive, and he's a great commentator. He's a hell of a salesman.
Yeah.
So he can quite easily sort of carry on flowing, and you forget the little things that he's done and backtracked on, which is a slight betrayal to the people that have voted for him. So I've picked up on these things. So I'm not, and I think even if you vote for somebody, you've still got to hold them to account. Well, you've backtracked on that. I voted for you for that reason, and you've done the complete opposite that you promised to do. Like, are you going to keep doing this? Are the promises going to become more and more broken, or are you going to give the people what they want, what you've promised to deliver? So that's really my main concern, because I've seen too many inconsistencies, and I think, well...
But that's what I say about him. He flips this way and that way. He's a political expedient. He's of the same mold.
Is he in it for himself, do you think?
Oh, completely. He talks about democracy. His own party's not democratic. He says the British people need to be able to direct the government, but he won't take direction from his own members. He talks about democracy, but in order to be able to talk about democracy, you need to be able to define the unit of democracy that you represent. What is the country, Nigel Farage, that you represent? Tell me, what's your country? He'll say the United Kingdom. He'll roll off his tongue. United Kingdom. But then how come he doesn't stand by Northern Ireland? How come he says the United Ireland's inevitable? How come he never once came out in support of my fight against the Northern Ireland Protocol? Why does he not denounce the Irish Sea border? Why does he say that Leo Varadkar, do you know who I mean? That he was the Prime Minister of the Republic of Ireland. Leo Varadkar took pictures of bombed out 1972 British border posts on the island of Ireland, and he went to the European Summit in 2018 and he said, this is what's going to happen if we leave the European Union. He weaponized the border issue. He effectively threatened the United Kingdom that there would be a resurgence of the IRA if we didn't give over Northern Ireland to the Republic and to the European Union. That's the threat that Leo Varadkar made to the British government. And Nigel Farage says Leo Varadkar is a perfectly nice guy. I think Leo Varadkar is the bloody devil. I wouldn't go near Leo Varadkar. Nigel Farage says he's happy to share a platform with Mary Lou McDonald, head of Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin is the political arm of a terrorist group that caused death and destruction across the United Kingdom for decades. I cannot stand on a podium with Mary Lou McDonald. Nigel Farage will throw many people in this country under a bus, but he's prepared to stand next to Mary Lou McDonald. She is an enemy of the United Kingdom in my mind. That may be inflammatory to some. But how can she represent Sinn Féin? She hasn't denounced the IRA. Why hasn't she denounced the IRA? I'll tell you something else that's really interesting. Really small point, but it's a giveaway. If you're an Irish nationalist, you refer to Northern Ireland as the North. If you're a British unionist, you refer to Northern Ireland as Northern Ireland. In an interview I saw where Nigel Farage was being interviewed by the Belfast newsletter, he referred to Northern Ireland as the North. Now, most people, they wouldn't understand it.
Go over their head.
But when I heard it, I thought, Jesus, that's Irish nationalist language. What is he saying? And he might say, well, I don't buy into the description that you've just outlined to Liam. I don't believe that that's the case. Any unionists in Northern Ireland, if there are unionists in Northern Ireland listening to this, tweet in, send a message or whatever, contradicting me if what I'm saying is not the truth. Everyone knows if you refer to Northern Ireland as the North, you're an Irish nationalist.
Let me move on to who you would and wouldn't share a stage with. In fact, actually, I can bring it into the two, because so Rupert Lowe isn't going to be joining Advance UK. Maybe I'll ask him, because I'm trying to get Rupert on as well. So with that said, or even without that said, who's on your recruitment list? What sort of patriotic people are on your recruitment list? Who would you like to see join?
So one thing that I'm certain of, there are some very good people in politics at the moment, no doubt. But the pond of fish, if I can call them that, out of which the existing political pond is the same pond that created all the problems we're facing. So I'm not particularly keen on fishing in that pond, because the fish haven't been so good to eat in the past, if you know what I'm saying. Now, there are some good fish. I mean, I do like Suella Braverman. I think Braverman is a very brave lady.
I thought you were going to say cod.
So she wasn't a great Home Secretary. Immigration went through the roof under her. She would blame Sunak. But she says things which are remarkable for a high-standing politician to say. She says many of the same things I say. And I'd have Suella Braverman in. But what I'm looking for real, capable, brave people. I don't care whether they come from politics or elsewhere. So I'm not going to sit here and reel off a whole load of political names that I want in the party. I'm looking for capable people.
Well, here we go. So Tommy Robinson's got his cultural events he puts on Unite the Kingdom. September the 13th, it's going to be the biggest festival of free speech that I think Europe's ever seen. It's going to be quite remarkable. I've seen what's going on in the background, and it's going to be incredible and incredibly patriotic. People are going to feel proud of their country, even if it's just for one day, without being judged. So would you share a stage with Tommy Robinson? Would you endorse Tommy Robinson? Would you welcome him? What about 𝐾𝐿⁴ What about Ant Middleton? Bookmark this, because your answers are quite extensive. And I don't like to interrupt you when you're flying because it's all very interesting. Normally, it would be a lot faster paced, but you've got a lot of useful information. So this will go on a little bit longer than usual. But so we'll go back to Tommy and 𝐾𝐿⁴ in a minute. But Ant Middleton, who's still, as far as I know, running for London Mayor under Reform. And then you've got Derek Chisora, who is he's like one of Farage's favourites as far as I've seen.
He's a boxer, isn't
he? Yeah, very, very tough man. So Ant Middleton, another tough guy, patriot, ex-military. Derek Chisora. Now, they've both agreed to speak at Tommy Robinson's event, Unite the Kingdom, in September.
Well, that's Ant Middleton done with Reform. Let me tell you.
That's the question. Will they now be alienated completely?
Oh, absolutely.
No questions asked?
No question. No question. If they don't know it, they don't know Farage. It's over.
So Farage would actually turn his back on Ant Middleton because he wants to share a stage with Tommy?
Yeah, absolutely. Even if he just tweeted in his favour. I know that Ant Middleton has tweeted in Tommy Robinson's favour. And I think that was the death knell in Reform for Ant Middleton. I'm certain of it. Ant Middleton is a big persona, so Farage may not wish to do that in a public way, but
he'll do it.
It'll be done quietly or whatever, but there's no way. There's no future for Ant Middleton in Reform.
Well, that's something to pay attention to then, because if you've called that now and it's not happened yet, down the line people can say, well, Ben Habib said that was going to happen.
Yeah, I'm certain of it. I'm sure everyone watching knows that. You know that, Liam, don't you?
I know that. Yeah. I know that, but I'm just little old me. You're the man that's worked alongside him for years, so you would know better than me. So I'd much rather ask the professional with the experience than just give my...
Well, for reasons that are not clear to me, are really not clear to me, Farage loathes Tommy Robinson.
Yeah, why is that?
I don't know.
Has Farage got main character syndrome?
I don't know. So this lot, the supranational order lot that are anti the United Kingdom, obviously are very threatened by people like Tommy Robinson, because Tommy Robinson wears his flag proudly and is very pro-British. So they're anti him, and they would wish to rubbish him. They would wish to categorise you and him as far right. They would wish to categorise me as far right. They would wish to do it because then they can rubbish me. But it's perfectly possible for a politician who wishes to avoid being categorised as far right by associating with Tommy Robinson to actually still tell the truth. You can still tell the truth about Tommy Robinson. You don't have to buy in to what they believe in order to curry favour with this lot, with whom you shouldn't be currying favour in the first place. I mean, if you really believe in freedom of speech, which is the second thing on our list of mission statements, nation state, freedom of speech, democracy, equality under the law, if you believe in freedom of speech, why would you wish to shut Tommy Robinson down? Why would you say this man shouldn't be allowed to speak? Why do we let Michelle O'Neill, who is another Sinn Féin member, be the First Minister of Northern Ireland? She's the First Minister of Northern Ireland, Sinn Féin. She went to the crowning of King Charles III. You know, she was invited. She was a guest. She's Sinn Féin, and you can't share a platform with Tommy Robinson. You can't be balanced about Tommy Robinson. There's a disconnect.
It's got to be a personal thing. It's got to be something deeper, because for me, when I saw Reform form, because obviously I know a lot of people in Parliament. In fact, I know that 100% of people in Parliament, they're not streetwise. So how can they relate? How can they be relatable to somebody that lays the bricks all day long, that gets himself in all sorts of trouble just to pay the bills? So I've always thought people in Parliament, they need a streetwise advisor. And when Reform formed, Tommy endorsed them in Leicester Square in front of 100,000 people. He never asked to join reform. He just endorsed him. He said, well, the only solution I can see is reform. And then the thank you he got was being lied about an LBC by Nigel Farage, which I'll never let go. And I really hope Nigel comes on one day so I can ask him about that and just say, are you going to put your hands up and say, I was wrong to do that, I was misinformed?
When he said he'd beaten women up.
Yeah. I mean, I cannot believe that a man of his calibre, knowing how far his sound bites travel because of how big a person he is in the political landscape and just as a public, he's been on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. In the jungle. He's a massive figurehead of the UK.
Yeah.
So he's got a major responsibility to make sure what he says is accurate, especially accusations like that. So I'd love to hear him. And if he's lied about anybody else that I don't know about, I only know about it because I know the people that he's been lying about personally. So if he's done that to anybody else, I mean, you got to stop doing that. And B, if it's absolutely proven that you've made a mistake and you were wrong, and the thing you was wrong about was really painting somebody in a terrible light, you've got to come back to a public platform and say, do you know what? On further investigation, I was wrong. There's no shame in saying you was wrong. Would you have a problem saying that you got something wrong ever?
I have made mistakes. I joined Reform. That's a joke. No, it was a good thing I did. It put Reform on the map. We've got a more fluid political system now, and hopefully we can fix it. But obviously we all make mistakes, and some people may be more prepared to accept that they've made a mistake than others, and it depends, I suppose, on the mistake that you made. And
you can't be slandering someone.
No, you can't be slandering someone. But this is my point. You should be perfectly capable of dissociating Tommy Robinson the man from Tommy Robinson the targeted political individual. Farage himself has been targeted, so he should have sympathy for what Tommy Robinson's been through. He should understand that the establishment would wish to blacken Tommy Robinson's name. I mean, one of the wake-up calls for me on Tommy Robinson with Farage was when Farage said that he deserves to be in prison for this contempt of the breach of the injunction and therefore contempt of law, contempt of court. And I thought to myself, I'm going to go and read up on this case because I want to understand what had happened. Obviously, contempt of court is a serious thing. So what happened here? And Farage will say he understands that we've got a two-tier criminal justice system, but he obviously didn't focus on it when he said Tommy Robinson deserved to be in prison over that issue. Because when you look at the case, it was a civil action, which, you know the case, and the viewers know the case, I'm sure, but I'll just quickly go through it. It was a civil action where an injunction had been placed on Tommy Robinson not to show that film about the Syrian boy, and he showed the film. And I think he kept showing it. It was still available or whatever. Now, a breach of an injunction would be met with a fine or with a slap on the wrist or ever-increasing fines or whatever. It's very rare for it to then be called up for the Attorney General, who is a political appointment, to get interested in the case. And for the Attorney General to get interested in the case, the Attorney General has to justify to himself that this is a matter of public interest. So he's got to make the case that this is it's a significant national issue. Now, I don't think Tommy Robinson's showing a film on the Syrian about what a punch-up between a Syrian guy and a white British boy. I don't see that as being of national interest. So we had a political figure, the Attorney General, taking it from being a civil action effectively into a criminal action for contempt of court, effectively, and having him imprisoned. Now, to any sane individual who is aware that we live in a two-tier criminal justice system, that means Tommy Robinson was a political prisoner. Why could Farage not see that? He'd been put in prison by the Attorney General taking an interest. The Attorney General is a politically appointed individual. He's not an independent judicial body. He's not an independent individual. He's part of the government. And he decided to do it. So it is by definition political. Are you with me? So why couldn't Farage say that?
I'm 100% with you.
So Farage could have easily said, look, I think Tommy was stupid for showing the film again and again and again. He could have said that, but he's a political prisoner. Those things are not mutually exclusive. There is a path he could tread without throwing Tommy Robinson under a bus.
Easily.
Easily.
So easily.
So easily. It doesn't require it. He didn't have to come out and say, oh, my God, I love Tommy Robinson. I'm going to kiss and cuddle him next time I see him. That wasn't required, but it certainly wasn't required to throw him under a bus. But Farage has a propensity to throw people under a bus. Have you ever heard of anyone leaving a political party of which Farage has been part or leading in particular? He's only led them, really. And left with a good word from Farage? Do you know anyone who's left any association with Farage saying he's a nice guy, I like him, it's a shame to see him go? I don't know of anyone.
Not yet.
No, so
Not
it's
yet.
not. The man he's challenged. He's got an issue. But on the two-tier justice thing, I think it's really important to note this. Farage is very good at saying we have a two-tier criminal justice system when he's identifying Palestinians who urinated on statues or the two Manchester guys who beat up the policewoman or whatever. He's very slow to cite the two-tier criminal justice system when that system is used against white people. Farage doesn't have the courage to then stand up for white folk. He's prepared to say, well, that Palestinian should have gone to jail, or that Palestinian supporter should have gone to jail, or those chaps in Manchester airport should have gone to prison, and it's two-tier justice that's kept them out of prison. But he won't say that this, that, and the other white person who's in prison should be released. After the Southport riots, the protests, Farage said he was aware of this is the biggest political scandal of my time. To words to that effect. Do you remember he said that? He's never said what the scandal was. He's been completely quiet on Peter Lynch, who hanged himself in prison because he was put in jail for stuff that he said, and he held a placard up with some conspiracy theories on it. He was put in prison. And people say, well, he was charged with violence and he pleaded guilty. Yeah, I'm sure he pleaded guilty. And I'm sure he was erroneously charged. That doesn't mean just because he pleaded guilty he accepts the blooming charges. He would have done it because he was under pressure, badly advised, and probably thought I'll be out of this more quickly than if I fight it. And he couldn't survive in prison. He killed himself. I haven't heard Reform talk about Peter Lynch. They're now talking about Lucy Connolly because she's got into the mainstream political lexicon. Now, they're all talking about Lucy Connolly. Now, it's fine. We can talk about Lucy Connolly. But where was he talking about Lucy? They've only just started talking about Lucy Connolly.
So he's not quite the maverick he'd probably like to be perceived as.
Yeah, so what I say again is he's a political expedient. He will do what he thinks he needs to do in order to curry favour with the people with whom he wishes to curry favour. He is a political expedient. Now, for me, a political expedient is a coward. It's not that he lacks courage on certain issues. To be a political expedient, you've got to be a coward.
Let me go back to Unite the Kingdom before I forget, because you captivate me with those eyes, Ben, and I get distracted. So if Tommy was to invite you to speak on the stage, for example, this is just sort of blue sky thinking. If Tom Robinson was to say, 30th of September, I'd love you to come on stage, stand right beside me, free speech event, and just have your say to the British public. There'll be at least 150,000 people there. Would you be too afraid to stand next to Tommy, or would you say, count me in?
Count me in. Why would I say no? Why would I say no? Give me a reason for saying no.
Because you lack testicular fortitude.
Let's say I did lack testicular fortitude.
I wasn't saying you do.
No, but let's say that I did. What's the reason not to stand next to Tommy Robinson and speak at that rally? Why would I be afraid of speaking?
Because of what, let's say, for example, Farage could then start branding you.
What will he say?
He could then start saying that you're friends with a far-right racist that beats up women. He could start doing all that nonsense.
Yeah, and that's why we must fight fearlessly for freedom of speech and reject the label that we're right-wing. It's vital. Liam, get the message out there. We're not right-wing. I don't see myself as right-wing. Do you see yourself as right-wing?
No.
No.
I used to think I was right down the middle. If we're going to accept the fact that wings do exist, as opposed to the common sense ledge that we should all be sitting on, the
pro-British common sense ledge. I mean, we are undoubtedly pro-British.
Yeah, because I mean, people have got to realise that, I think last year, 4 out of 10 babies were conceived from foreign parents. Like, if you can't see that we are gradually being replaced, then you got to wake up and smell the coffee.
But Farage says he's not concerned about the rate of demographic change. He's not concerned about it.
See, that should concern people that are invested in him.
It should do, absolutely.
Because that is kind of adopting that I'm all right Jack attitude, which I'm so anti, which is what I don't like about the left.
And that's why I say he blows this way and blows that way. So he hasn't got a settled political philosophy. And that's an issue.
And your recruitment list.
So I haven't got a recruitment list. I want people who are brainy. I want people who are capable. And I want people who are fearless.
Katie Hopkins?
I met Katie Hopkins last week. I'd only ever watched Batshit Bonkers Britain until I met her. And I did watch her in an Oxford Union debate where she was great. I think Anne Widdecombe, they were debating freedom of speech. And she said, I have every right to offend you. And she then went on to offend everyone who was congregated at the debate. But I met her last week for a 1.5 hour meeting, and we discussed everything under the sun. And I found her to be incredibly bright, capable, right across the detail, phenomenal individual.
So she'd be welcome to Advance UK?
Everyone is welcome to be a member. What I have said with Advance UK is that we are not going to be policing tweets of members and saying, you tweeted this 4 or 5 years ago, you're not welcome. No way. That's not... Look, if they're British citizens and they're on the electoral roll and they can vote, why would I reject them in a political party? That would be pretty stupid, wouldn't it? It would be like saying, I don't want votes from that lot, which I think was a pretty stupid comment.
Richard Tice.
Yeah, it was a stupid comment from Richard. Richard, what are you trying to do? Wrap yourself in a cloak of correctitude? You want the whole world to think, oh, I'm a really good guy, we won't take votes from that lot? They are British citizens. They have the vote.
They're all the patriots. They're all the football guys that get together, that call a truce on their problems for the betterment of the country, for the protection of our women and our children. And they're the people that lay the bricks, that shift the scaffold poles. They're the hard-working backbone of Britain, that if we went to war, would be the first people that got called upon.
Yeah.
I wonder if Richard Tice would take that stance if we was on high alert to actually go into a war, or if, well, I mean, heaven forbid, I sit there, I don't think we're too far from a civil war, do you?
Well, I think the British people don't rise up. It's one of our greatest strengths and one of our biggest weaknesses is that we don't rise up. We just keep taking it.
Keep taking the hits.
Keep taking the hits. And I think it has served France, I think, really badly, their revolution. I think France has never really recovered from the French Revolution. And you look at France, it's a much less stable country than we are. We're a much better country. But it's going to get to a point where we will just cease to exist as a country. And that's what I mean by the existential threat that we're facing. And so we've got to wake up. I mean, what I want, let me be clear, I do not want division in this country. I want peace in the United Kingdom. And the problem with what's gone on, if it's allowed to go on the way we're being governed, is that more peaceable people will get more polarized. And the more polarized people get, the greater division you get in society. The greater the division we get in society, the more likelihood we will have of something violent going on. And I'll tell you something, an interesting story. I don't know how much more time we've got, but I'm happy to talk as long as you're happy to listen. I was at a lunch the other day. There was a French guy sitting opposite me. I didn't know he was French. And I was mouthing off about how bloody awful the French were in terms of not stopping the dinghies and that they'd lost control of their own border, that Macron was a dick and that they're part of this global nonsense and so on. And then he spoke and he had a French accent. And I thought, I said, I'm really sorry. I hope I didn't offend you. And he said, not at all. He said, I used to be quite middle of the road and not engaged, but I'm bloody angry now with what's going on in France. I completely understand what you're saying. So when countries are habitually badly governed and not governed in the interests of their people, people become polarized, people become triggered, people become angry. And then you create the ingredients for a blow-up. And what's vital, and this is why Farage has to get it right. If Farage is the Prime Minister, the next Prime Minister, he has to get this right. Because the only way to settle the country is to do the right thing. The only way the country is going to be settled and we will have peace is if the government does the right thing. If it does the wrong thing, you're going to get more of the same. And my aim, I might be naive, but my aim is to stand absolutely firmly on the ground in which I believe, which is nation state, freedom of speech, democracy, and equality before the law, and to deliver the policies for that. And in the pursuit of that, I will not budge. And that's vital. You've got to be able to act with integrity on all those issues. So if you say to me, Ben, I only want to know you if you think Tommy Robinson is the second coming of the Messiah, I will say to you, Liam, I'm afraid I can't get that far. But if you say to me you want Tommy Robinson to have the full protection of the British law and the right to freedom of speech like any other British citizen, I will say 100%. 100% we have to fight for his rights as a British citizen, the right for his freedom of speech. And Farage should make that point.
Would you restructure the police force?
So I think the country needs two things. We need a complete revamp of our legislative framework. We need to basically repeal everything that Tony Blair and subsequent governments have done. We need to go back to a pre-1998 legal system so that we don't have the ability for two-tier criminal justice. Two-tier criminal justice is not an accident, Liam. It's the creation, it's the result of legislation and regulations. The reason a lot of these people who turned a blind eye to the gangs, the reason they turned a blind eye is because they've been drilled to turn a blind eye and progressively discriminate in favor of ethnic minorities. It's part of our regulatory framework. When I run a public company, so it's listed on the London Stock Exchange. It's also registered with the Financial Conduct Authority, regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. I have to send in reports on the ethnic mix of my executive. I have to send in reports on whether we've got transgender people employed in the company and stuff. This is not normal. A company should just have one objective: making money. Everything should be done on merit in the pursuit of making money, obviously within the bounds of the law, not being fraudulent or whatever. But I should not have to be giving a government an account of my social justice my social justice policies. What the hell is that?
It's insane.
It's insane. That is discrimination. That all has to be ditched. We will not be able to settle the police force or our courts or our justices or our civil servants or our social services or our educational establishments until we first change the law to prohibit what they're doing, because actually the law now encourages them to do what they're doing. We have to change the law. And then we need a reverse of this long march through the institutions that's taken place over 30 years. We need to reverse it. You probably know this, but there are judges advocating illegal migration. There are British judges sitting in support groups for illegal migrants, using the law to prevent them from being able to be deported, for using the law to prevent them from being deported, advising them on how. Judges, I'm not talking about barristers. These are judges.
And would you have a deportation plan?
Absolutely. Well, as I said, I mean, I think that anyone that's here illegally anyone here illegally needs to be detained and deported. And if you can't deport them because they're from a country with which we don't have a relationship, then we must sanction that country. We must cut aid to it or put tariffs on it or whatever. And they need to be incarcerated until they're deported. And you don't have to do a lot of that in order to then stop the illegal migrants coming here. They just need to know that if they come here, that's the treatment they're going to get, then they won't come. It's pretty simple. You know, they only come because they know they're not going to get that treatment.
Stop the benefits. It's kind of, the boats will stop themselves,
Yeah,
surely.
so it's really interesting. As I said, I'm half Pakistani. My sister is married to a Pakistani. So I know some people in Pakistan. And I was talking to head of he's a retired head now, of one of the law enforcement agencies in Pakistan. And I did an interview with him on the gangs. And I said, so look, it's mostly Pakistani men who are raping these young girls in England. Pakistan should reach out to the British government and it should say, send these bastards back to Pakistan. We'll give them a bit of Pakistani justice, which I tell you what, will be much firmer than anything they get in British justice. And he said, you know, Ben, we've got a treaty with the British government, the Pakistan Prisoner Transfer Treaty, which enables the British government to deport to Pakistan all Pakistanis who've broken the law in the United Kingdom. That treaty was put in place in 2018. It's never once been invoked because the European Convention of Human Rights trumps all. And what he said to me is, the problem with you lot in England is that you protect the criminals, you don't protect victims. You've forgotten who's been damaged in the criminal act. And that too, by the way, without wishing to labour the point, comes from the Human Rights Act, from the European Convention of Human Rights. Because in the same way that it set aside the importance of being a British citizen, it set aside the concept that if you're a criminal, you deserve sanction. He's still a human, but he's a paedophile. Yeah, I know, but he must be treated well. The crime of pedophilia has been committed, you must not compound the problem by now sanctioning him. Can you see the argument? We've turned criminal justice on its head in this country, and the root cause goes all back to this 1998 Act, and subsequent issues that all have to be repealed. But we don't know what it means to protect victims. We protect criminals. We don't know how to deport people because we view their rights as important as ours. We will allow civil society in the United Kingdom to be assaulted before we assault those that assault our society. We're prepared, and this is the paradox. We're prepared to fly our jets thousands of miles into someone else's country and drop bombs and kill lots of people, but we are not prepared to enforce our own borders, to protect ourselves here.
Is there something that the British public don't know about the Pakistani community that you do as to why there's such a lot of Pakistani men raping young white British children?
Yeah.
What is that?
It's this. The Pakistani men that have been taken into this country in Pakistan would be regarded as bloody animals. Let me be clear. The Pakistani rapists in this country, if they were in Pakistan, they would be absolutely abhorred. The notion that rape is accepted, pedophilia is accepted, is a fundamentally flawed concept.
Why do you think there's so many Pakistani men doing
it? Because we have let in people from the depths of Punjab, people who haven't brushed with civilized society ever in their lives. These people are uncivilized. You won't get someone who's been educated in Karachi, been to Karachi University and so on, behaving like that. This is what I mean. We've lost touch with the protection of our own country. Keir Starmer will say to us, the guy from the depths of Punjab who's never left his village and his farm has every right to be in the UK. Why are you discriminating against him? Because he sees his human rights as being as important as ours. But they're not. And these bastards wouldn't commit paedophilia in Pakistan because they would be incarcerated and have very nasty things done to them in Pakistani prisons.
Would they get their limbs chopped off over there?
Until 2016, 2017, it was the death penalty.
And are you for or against the death penalty over here?
An interesting question. I think the winning argument against the death penalty is that mistakes can be made, that you might put to death the wrong person. But when a society is getting so out of balance as we are, people become polarized. Remember I said that. People become more polarized. Mm-hmm. Society starts becoming less peaceful. You have riots. You have all that kind of thing going on. And then the other thing that happens is that the system has to then become more draconian. The system has to become more draconian because it needs to stamp down on all this that's going on. And if crime becomes out of control, we will go back to more severe punishments. It's inevitable. And a sign of us going back to the death penalty, and there will potentially come a time where we will have to go back to it if we don't get a grip of what's going on in our criminal justice system. It'll be a sad day because it'll be a step back. It may be a necessary step, but it'll represent our governing class having failed the United Kingdom. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. We should have created a society where the death penalty is not required. If we're bringing it back, it's because we haven't governed our country properly. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does. Mosques.
Yeah.
So if Advance UK was in power, would you limit the amount of mosques that are being built? Would you request that some mosques get knocked down even? Because they're forever increasing, aren't they?
Yeah. So a number of things. This country is at the end of 30 years' experiment of multiculturalism, where progressive discrimination has favoured ethnic minorities, people of ethnic religious beliefs. It's put a protective blanket around all of those people. When you protect a particular group of people from the majority, which is what progressive discrimination is, it's like these people are, you the majority, need to protect this minority. Within that minority, well, first of all, the entire minority that exists is capable of exercising its musculature. It can be much more muscular. it can do much better than the rest of society because it's protected. Are you with me? But within that grouping, the group that will be strongest will be the one that is most numerous and most muscular itself. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So within the DEI protected blanket, this sort of diversity, equity and inclusion, progressive discrimination blanket that we put around all these people, which includes Muslims, Hindus, Jews, transgender, gay people, etc., the grouping that is strongest and most numerous are the Muslims. So what we've done is not just taken mass migration from the depths of Punjab, people who wouldn't be allowed in polite society in any country, frankly, but we've taken them in. We've protected them. And we've said, you must do what you wish in our country because you're in this protected status. And they have flourished. And they're very good at flourishing because they're much more muscular in their beliefs. We as a Christian country have taken a step back from our religious beliefs and the way that we project our belief system. We hold our beliefs in our pockets. Islam doesn't hold its belief in its pocket. It holds its belief in public. It's important for Muslims to proselytize, to convert. Christianity doesn't convert. Judaism, progressive, positively tries to dissuade you from becoming a Jew. You know, you want to become a Jew, they'll try and dissuade you. It's really interesting. That's a different subject. But so we've taken the worst kinds of people from the depths of Punjab with the most backward way of thinking, and we have put a protective blanket around them and said, please flourish in our society. And the other thing, and we talked briefly about 𝐼𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐸, and she's very good on this. There's been an exportation of what she calls fundamentalist Islamist ideology from Saudi Arabia since the mid-1980s. And the kind of Islam that is practiced in the United Kingdom is mostly fundamentalist Wahhabi Islam. There are Muslim groups in this country that are so threatening that the UAE has proscribed them, but they are allowed to do what they wish to do in the United Kingdom. And what we've got to do is, in order to right all of this, there's no point pointing out the problems without correcting them. What we've got to do is we've got to cut immigration. First of all, we've got to cut immigration in the way that I described. We've got to get rid of people in this country who shouldn't be here. We've got to get rid of this progressive discrimination, this protective blanket we've created around people. And then we need to do something beyond that. And it's this. We need to be much more confident, and I would say much more muscular in the promotion of our own culture. We've got to stop this nonsense about accepting other people's culture, and we need to be utterly clear that if you come to the United Kingdom, you're coming to a culturally Christian country. We like our women in short skirts. You know, we don't like seeing women in burqas. On the burqa is the outward expression of the repression of women. It's the most visual expression you can have of the repression of a woman. Now, the liberals, this supranational liberal global order, would say, don't be such a bastard. It's their liberal right to wear a burqa. That is turning liberalism on its head. We fought hundreds of years for the emancipation, or women fought for their own emancipation. This is their repression. And when a woman wears a burqa in the United Kingdom, not only is she signalling her repression, what she's doing is rejecting British culture. It's an outward rejection of what we are. And that has to stop. Now, I wouldn't ban the burqa necessarily, but what I would do is put in place policies that remove the likelihood of seeing the burqa.
So outside the family house, remove the burqa?
Well, no, I would basically have many fewer foreigners living in the country. I would have a requirement that they absolutely integrate and buy into our Christian culture. I would and this is tangential but important and part of it, that schools now start singing. Gone is the time that we can comfortably keep our Britishness and our Christianity in our pockets. We need to be proud of who we are. We need to start singing the national anthem. We need to put the flag, on public buildings, in schools. Schools need to start singing the national anthem. We need to project our Christianity. The King of England needs to know he's head of the Church of England. The bishopric, who sit in the House of Lords, Starmer wants to remove them from the House of Lords. He wants to remove the bishops from the House of Lords because he wants us to cease to be a constitutionally Christian culture. We must fight that. It's in his King's speech that he's going to remove the bishops from the House of Lords. That must be rejected, because when he removes the bishops from the House of Lords, he will then say we're no longer a Christian country. So there are fundamental changes we need to make in order to settle our society and to make sure that we have a homogeneous, settled culture. And then if we achieve that, Liam, we won't need to tear down mosques or ban the burqa or whatever, because there won't be any more mosques being built. There won't be any women wishing to wear the burqa, because we would have settled our culture. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. If we fail to do it, if we fail to take the steps that I've just outlined to reach a peaceable settlement, then what you will get is what we've been describing a few times, which is division, more mosques going up, more muscular Islam, more people getting disenfranchised, more riots, more protests from all sides, and a more draconian policing system. And we will cease to be the peaceable, prosperous country that we were. We need to start governing with principle and seriousness urgently so that we don't become that country.
Ben, you have made my job very, very easy today, and I could have listened to you for hours, but this is probably one of the longest interviews we've done in a long, long time. So before we wrap it up, is there a final message to the masses from you?
So my final message to the masses is, if you believe in the United Kingdom, if you're proud of your history and our culture, if you believe in freedom of speech, if you believe in democracy, no matter how messy it is, and no matter how awful our parliamentarians clearly are, and if you believe in equality before the law and that Lady Justice should be blind, there's only one party to join, that is Advance UK, because the other political parties don't stand for those. As basic as those declarations may be, as obvious as they might seem to most people, that is not how the other political parties are functioning. They're not functioning to that agenda, including reform. So please join Advance UK. I've set a hurdle of 30,000 members to be achieved before I apply for full party status for Advance UK. There's a discounted rate of £10 per annum for members who join before we become a fully fledged party. And the reason I've done that is to ensure that my own assessment of a new party being required and wanted is actually wanted. That there are 30,000 odd people out there who can show me that they want a new party. And once we reach that hurdle, we will have an army of people around the country who can campaign for what we need to campaign for. We will have £300,000 in the bank, it's not a huge amount of money, but it's the basis of going forward. At that point, I will donate £100,000 to the party myself, so that just to show that I'm absolutely with the people who've put their money and their faith in me. I will put my 100,000 in, and then we will fight the fight, the good fight, to fight for the agenda that I've just described, and make sure that all the parties, including my erstwhile party and the Conservatives and Labour and Liberal Democrats, recognise that they have to take note of us and that we will be an important component of the British political landscape, and we will deliver our agenda, and we will not stop until we've done it. That's the key, knowing that we're going to be so bloody stubborn. Maybe naive, I'm bloody stubborn. I ain't going anywhere.
And handsome.
Okay, well, that's very kind of you. Thank you.
And is X the best social media platform for people to follow and find you?
Yeah, so my Twitter handle is at Ben Habib 6, or the political party's political handle is @_Advance UK. Or you can go to to sign up as a member, please go to our website, which is www.advanceuk.org.uk. advanceuk.org.uk. That's advanceuk.org.uk.
Okay. We'll put some of Ben's links in the description. If you've liked what you've heard and you want to see and hear more, you know where to find him. If you like these conversations, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep them coming. Ben, I appreciate you are rushed off your feet with a busy schedule, and thank you for giving me so much of your time and so much of you.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you.
It's a joy. Good health, brother.
Thank you.